This week on Tuesday noon, former police officer Linda Fischer Lewis joins the roundtable to talk about the job, the beat, drinking, drugs, and prison. All that in the circle of life. It's Tuesday noon for August 15th, 2006. Welcome to Tuesday noon. What is today? I don't even know what today is.
Tuesday.
It is Tuesday. And it's noon.
15th.
It's August 15th. It's Tuesday noon for August 15th. I am Pete Wright. I'm sitting here next to my friend and colleague, Jamie Whitley. Mr. Jamie Whitley. And Mary Bradbury Jones.
Yes.
Who you have a new gig. Can you talk about it now?
I do have a new gig.
Please tell us, what are you doing now?
I am working for Marylhurst University.
Yeah.
And helping them launch an online program.
Well, that's fantastic.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well,
So
they
don't
picked
have
the
one
right
today,
person.
Is that right? And they're moving into that? Is that?
Yeah, they have an existing program that they're kind of finishing out and then revamping and changing.
Well, they picked the right person to have them help.
Well, thank you very
We're
much.
sad to lose you from the University of Phoenix crowd, but you're still teaching for us, right?
I am, and heavily involved.
Well, and you're still here
That's
for
very good.
Tuesday noon, right?
And still here for
She's
Tuesday
not.
noon. We're not going to lose her from the team.
Because
is
if it was
good.
just you and I.
That
no.
would be tragic.
No.
Comedy. Yeah, well, it's excellent. Congratulations on the new year. Officially over there now, working.
Yes, I am.
Happy.
Doing fine, yes.
Not as happy, but happy.
Miss everybody here
Yeah.
a lot.
Of course she does. And us the most.
We're very special people.
Yes.
We have a very special episode, another very special episode of Tuesday
All
noon.
the episodes.
All the episodes are slightly more special than the
special.
last.
Today we have a very, can you say special guest? Is that?
I don't
know. Very
I don't know. Ask our guest. She'll
I
tell
think
you
it
if that's...
depends what you mean by special.
Well, that's what I was saying. Is she special? Is she not? We have a very special guest today who comes to us out of law enforcement. Her name is Linda Fischer Lewis, and we're here today to talk a little bit about all kinds of things: drugs, crime, community policing, death penalty, you name it, we'll cover it. Linda, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me here to start with. I just retired after 19 years in law enforcement and been involved in law enforcement since really I knew I was going to be a police officer since I was 12, so it's been something I've dedicated most of my life to. And along with that, looking at climbing up the ladder, eventually spent a lot of time in the school systems and education and hoping to get me there. And I do a lot of teaching in law enforcement. I think it's the greatest job in the world, and if I can take 5 minutes to encourage anybody to go into that field, I'll certainly take advantage of it, because I think we're looking for great people, and I think it's the best job.
Why?
Why? Because I think it takes a special person to be committed to making the community safe and doing things for other people that you may not even know. There's a lot of freedom, responsibility in the job, and a lot of jobs don't offer that. You can go outside and really make a difference in someone's life on a daily basis if that's what you choose to do. And there's really not a lot of jobs that allow you to do that. I think it's a noble career. And I think anytime people are willing to put other people's needs first, I think it takes a special person to do that, but I think it makes it a great job, because you're not only doing something that you enjoy, but you're doing something that makes a difference in the world.
Very cool.
That was really cool.
That's very cool. Now, I would say, what do you think is the society's perception of police officers? I mean, do you think the majority of society views that job, like you described it, as noble, as wanting to do something for the community and to give for others?
I wouldn't say that a majority of the society sees that. I think a lot of the society does. I mean, there's a lot of times that people come up to police officers and thank them for what they do. I think with 9/11 actually opened a lot of people's eyes to how much people are willing to sacrifice for the safety of other people. Right. But then again, there's the whole media role and how the media looks at law enforcement, and a lot of times people in the community draw their conclusions about police officers from what the media depicts their job. And so I think there's a lot of people that are rational enough to know or have contact with police and they realize that they are good people and they work hard. And then there's the few that listen to what the media and draws their conclusions from that.
So what do you mean listen to the media? I don't understand. So, I mean, we see things on TV. Are you saying that we get a one-sided viewpoint, and what is that?
I think especially when things first happen. An example would say just a shooting, because that's something obviously that always makes the news. And when a law enforcement officer is involved in a shooting, there's limited information that can come out to begin with, because it's an ongoing investigation. And that investigation is to make sure that what the actions the law enforcement officer took were, in fact, legal actions. And so why it's an ongoing investigation? Because really a shooting is really a homicide unless it's determined if it's justified or not by the officer. So there's limited information that can come out to the media, and so the media is going to give the information they can, and people are forced to read between the lines. And I think our society capitalizes on negative information, and that's the direction they're going to go first. And it's going to sometimes be a month or so before the actual information can get out as to what really happened. And so conclusions are drawn. And those conclusions usually aren't favorable for the law enforcement. There's the beliefs, some of the classes I teach right now, why can't we shoot the gun out of someone's hand? Why, it's just not practical. You're in a high-stress situation. You have to make a decision that's life or death. And to try to narrow down your sights and use your fine motor skills to shoot, the gun out of someone's hand or something like that just isn't realistic. I mean, you're talking fractions of a second to make a decision. And so I think people don't necessarily maybe understand that, haven't been in that type of stressful situation. Mm-hmm. And, we just draw conclusions based on, reading between the lines of the information. And most of the time that's not positive.
Well, my concern is when I watch the news is that all you see are all those negative things, mm-hmm. and we don't see the hundreds and thousands of positive things that the police do every single day, so we just get the one news clip or five that's all negative.
That's exactly what I was just thinking about. I mean, in fact, based on what we see today and the amount of police information on the media makes the police role one of delivery of bad news. I mean, that really is the function in today's society.
Yes.
That's all we get. So what do we do? What is the function of the police doing to improve that?
Well, I think first
the role of the PR in your average police force has got to be excruciatingly painful.
Well, I think having a good information officer within a police department is really important to get the information out to not make it seem like a closed system, because it's not a closed system, because we need the help of the community in order for law enforcement to be successful. But I wanted to get back to what you said about the bearers of bad news. If you really think about the role of a police officer, there rarely is a time that you're going to see a police officer with it initially being a positive experience. So if you're asking a police officer to your house, it's not because you're having a barbecue and you want them to hang out and you want to chat with them. It's because you've been a victim of something. It doesn't mean the police officers brought the bad news. It means you've been a victim, and so you've called them there. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be negative. If something's happened to your family, if there's been a motor vehicle accident, if it's a traffic ticket, whatever it is, it just doesn't have a positive ground to start with. And in the 19 years I was in law enforcement, I never had someone call me up and say, hey, we're having a barbecue, would you like to stop by? I mean, that's just not the nature of the job. But officers do a lot of positive things, and I think the compassion that they have, I mean, from the police officer standpoint, how many times do you go and tell a family that they've lost a family member in a motor vehicle accident? I think the compassion that person takes with them when they go to that family, it's still bad news, but it's just as hard on the person delivering the news as it is the person receiving it. And you may receive that news once in your lifetime, and a police officer gives that message several times in a lifetime. And instead of just seeing it as a negative impact, looking at the compassion it takes for those people to go do that in a caring way, to stay there with you, to get people there to support you, whether it be chaplains, other family members, they'll stay there with you, tell you, make the phone calls you need, get people there to be with you. They're never going to leave you alone, Mm-hmm. And that's emotional for them too. So, I mean, it's difficult, and I think it's just nature of the job that makes people perceive negative contacts. But it's really, it's really not. There's a lot of times that you have contacts with police officers that end up in a good way, even if they started in a bad way. I've seen lost kids in the community and police officers putting in extra time, staying overtime, coming in on their own time, to help those people. Back with the floods, I saw police officers coming in on their days off just to help people. Not because they were getting paid to, not for any other reason, but you're in the middle of it and, you have a commitment to society and coming in and putting that extra time. And it's just that it's limited times that people really see or understand how much that goes on.
What is maybe the average tenure of a police officer?
Well, what they say in law enforcement is they have you for 5 years, they have you for life. And so a lot of police officers, the attrition happens within that first 5 years. The stress of it, the shift work, the different things, people usually decide pretty early on. And I think a lot of people decide within the first 2 years that maybe it is not the job for them. When they say they have you for life after 5 years, I think that you get such a perspective of people, and you're dealing with that, 10% of the people that take up 90% of your time. It's easy to start to get cynical, mm-hmm. and you forget that there are actually a lot of really good people because you don't deal with them. I see younger people maybe decide not to have family, not to have kids, because they don't get to see the good side of kids all the time. They get to see the negative side of kids. And it just kind of, I think, comes kind of a cycle where you get really attached to people, their life and death situations you've been in with those people, and you kind of get committed to that. And I think that's why you don't see people leave law enforcement after that period of time, because you maybe don't feel like other people understand. And then once you've been there for a period of time, then of course the retirement issues, and are you going to start over at that point? Do you feel like you're socialized anymore? You can do other jobs. What is it that you're qualified to do when you've been in that situation for that period of time in high stress? And then a lot of police officers die within the first year and a half after they retire. And it's just the change in the job and the people in that connection.
Wow.
Interesting.
And a lot of the illnesses are stress-related.
Once they leave,
yeah,
they develop cancer
or they'll have the stress-related injuries, but you don't slow down enough, and then at the time, stress-related like heart issues or that.
Suddenly you slow down and momentum catches up with you.
And it's not a conducive lifestyle to healthy eating. You're working odd hours, you're on the rush, you're grabbing things in a hurry, so, the foods that you eat and that kind of thing probably aren't the best for you, and you do that for 25 years, and like anybody who does that, it's probably not going to have a good ending for you.
What sort of development are you seeing in non-lethal sort of restraint? And
non-lethal seems to, I think, kind of come and go. 10 years ago, the beanbags were the big thing, and, you saw them successfully using them against people with maybe challenged with mental illnesses that are having some type of episode.
Yeah.
But then they find out that they're not necessarily that successful with people. I mean, if they're not firing necessarily, correctly in the brain or that, maybe the pain, they're not going to feel the pain tolerance, and that's what those work on, is a pain-type tolerance.
Right.
And I saw the police departments making a real trend towards it, and then it kind of goes away again because police officers end up getting hurt because they're in a situation where they should be using lethal force possibly, and they're bringing less lethal force, as they say, bringing a knife to a gunfight. You're bringing a beanbag to a gunfight, and you're probably not going to end up on the upper end. They've had pepper balls, has been a real successful way. The tasers are kind of the trend now.
What do the pepper balls do?
They have a OC spray inside of them, and so when you shoot and they impact, then the OC spray comes out, right? And that incapacitates someone as far as difficult breathing. Usually their eyes will shut, and they can breathe, but it just feels different, kind of difficult, kind of creates a panic-type feeling and kind of incapacitates people for a short period of time. And so there's been trends, it seems like they come and go, and right now the tasers are kind of the hot topic. There's been some deaths when people have been tased, but they're not actually related to the tasers. But, of course, the correlation gets drawn, and so I think they're going to start looking at that again. I mean, there's never, I think, going to be a complete answer, and it's just the idea of, people want us to police officer do the least they can to deal with a situation, but they never want to see it come to a lethal end. And the police officers don't either. But, I mean, the fact is sometimes it's going to. That doesn't make anybody happy, but you can't put police officers' life in jeopardy because you think they should be taking a beanbag to a gunfight. I think a lot of it comes back to the public information officer at the departments and getting the information out. And when you're in a scenario where it is a less lethal and it's successful, explaining why it is. Yeah. And when you're in a less lethal situation that rises to the occasion of a lethal situation, helping people understand why that is. I mean, I think if there's a weakness in the community, it's being willing to give the information out. In a way, it's kind of like these things are a secret. However, communication is always going to be your friend, and if you can get information out where people have the opportunity to understand what is actually going on, then they're going to be understanding more of why we have to react the way we do, or why we don't have to react the way we do, or what all is going on. But as long as it kind of stays a closed community, I think that's always going to be a hurdle.
Well, and it's certainly hard in 15 and 20-second sound bites. So you're trying to explain something that's a little more complicated, and then you've only got a couple of seconds on a TV news program or whatever to go over it, and so then it gets washed down to its minimal part, and people pick up on it and take it as fact or whatever, and so it's difficult to do, I imagine, very difficult.
Absolutely, and situations that aren't, that are charging, that people really want to know about, maybe aren't the situations that end up in a less lethal happy ending. Maybe those aren't the ones that we really want to spend the time on. We want to spend the time the ones that didn't. And, Pete said early on, we only see a certain part of it. We see one good thing or bad thing that happens in a month, and we don't see the 100 positive things that the police officers have done in their community during that month also. It's kind of sensationalism. What do people want to hear?
But that doesn't sell.
That's why I don't watch the news. That's why I don't watch nightly news.
I don't either.
You get a dozen negative things in a row: deaths, stabbings, murder, fraud, whatever.
Bacteria in the kitchen.
Yeah, I don't need that. Tell me something positive.
Yeah.
I just don't turn it on.
How do you guys get your news? I know it's a discussion for another segment.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. You guys seem like pretty informed people, and you're not watching the news. I hear that all the time. I don't take in any media because it's all biased and negative, and I don't.
Well, except for Fox News.
Except for Fox News, and watch them all the time because they're fair and balanced.
Absolutely. Well, no, I don't watch the local nightly news generally just because it is all negative stuff. And do I want to feel that about my community? And because and this is a question for you, Linda. By and large, when you see all this, you come away thinking, "Oh my God, the world's falling apart, and should I even go out of my house?" And is it really like that?
Well, I think
out there,
what you got to remember is that 90-10 rule. Is that 10% of the people take up 90% of the time. So if you look at that as the population, it's a small percentage of the population that is involved in these issues. So really, it's a small part of your area. If you just think about just 10% of everything, it really is a small part and a few people that are involved in that. So I think it's easy to have that idea, but it's not really logical and realistic because it is just a small amount. If you think about anything, in your workplace, with employees or whatever, 10% of those people take up 90% of your time. In the school setting, 90%, it's the same idea. So if you think about that 90-10 principle, you're only getting just a small, snippet of actually what's going on and what the issues are.
One of the things I've seen a lot in the news these days is, and it relates to technology, which we do a lot in this show, but technology and sexual predators and the internet and kids. And I mean, is that really a big problem? And what are we seeing? And
it is a huge problem, and I don't think the media can portray enough how big of a problem that is. We have communities where right now, both parents work in the home and the kids are left at home and they have computers and they're going to find a way to have conversation and be involved in these chat rooms, are just a lifeline for pedophiles. And, the parents don't necessarily know what's going on. And parents that are informed and want to be a part of it aren't going to catch it 100%. And, you've got this lifeline for these, and it's an awkward age for kids in those teenage years. And they've got someone that's paying attention to them and is their friend and thinks that they're great and that doesn't judge them or have any issues. And
has their best interest
and they want to
at
meet
heart.
with them, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we get people coming down from other states. You talk about the substantial step to come and meet up with those kids, and maybe they don't meet up with them, but they come from another state and plan on it. They're in the neighborhood. We've had to really start to work with those laws because it's obvious what these people's intents are. And, they're good at hiding who they are. You see pedophiles in the news. They take positions where they can be with kids. They're going to do the same thing where they can have the conversation with the kids online and portray that image that those kids are interested in. I mean, they know what they're doing, and it is a big problem, and it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem all the time.
And how many pedophiles are there out there? I mean,
More than 3?
You would think, though, that it's in the scheme of things, it should be a small number. Certainly, you would hope.
But even if it is, that the pedophile isn't just interested in one child.
Well, and are they
so
ever
they
truly
move around.
reformed?
Yeah, I don't even know how to rationalize that question.
But you know what I mean? By listening
Thank God
to
there
that,
aren't too many of them.
Listening to that makes you think, my gosh, what's happened to people? All these people like kids.
Are
I
people
does that
really
make sense?
different? I don't know if the percentages are any different than they used to be. I mean,
Maybe it's just easier to get access,
Sure.
and then therefore.
Sure.
Well, I think the internet has really made the access easier for people to be in contact with children because you don't even have to have children in your community. You can have them in the next county, the next state, or whichever due to the internet.
And now you
But are sexual predators ever reformed? So we send them to jail or we do whatever, and they get out, and they just do the same thing over again. And it's what it seems like when I look at the news. Is that accurate?
There was just a recent story of that happening here where it got out and I think was out maybe a week. Something like that. I can't remember the name. But
so why do we let them out in the first place?
I think that is, everybody I think has a different position on that. Whether it's factual or not, I don't know. I personally don't think that they are reformed, and I think there's been many prolific pedophiles in the past who have said that they won't be reformed. They'll continue to do what they do. And there's Jeffrey Dodds out of Washington who asked to be put to death because he's never going to change. And so I guess you can look at it from the perspective of those people that are pedophiles that say, yeah, I can't be reformed, and and then draw your conclusions from there.
Wow, that's a scary thing.
It's totally scary. But I think from what I've read, and I'm certainly not an expert at it, but we were talking earlier today that we have another expert in this actual area of pedophiles and serial killers and those sorts of things that we ought to have on the show sometime. But no, I don't. According to him and what I've read, there isn't a lot of reform. And so, what do you do in that case? Death penalty? Do you?
Well, how much leeway do you have when you,
life.
again, it goes back to this sort of, decisions made on committee. You have a guy who says, I'm never going to be reformed. I don't know how that turned out. Was he put to death?
Yes, he was.
Oh, fancy that. See, I had a whole argument about how a committee probably stepped in and said no. But he got his wish. Yeah.
I wanted that.
But how often does that happen? I mean,
yeah, it's rare.
Yeah.
That someone would accept that much responsibility, for their own actions and realizing this is the way it's going to be. It's not the way I should be. So
there have also been rapists that have said that too.
Yeah.
That I can't be reformed and I need to spend the rest of my life in jail because I'll do it again if I have the opportunity. But then there have been, I think, I don't know, have there been rapists that have been reformed?
I don't know.
Or just haven't been caught again?
Or haven't been caught.
Good point.
Man.
I think there's a society issue, when it comes to that and people's rights and, if it was your family member, what would you want done? And then, maybe they can be reformed. I think there's always that, because we do try actually to find the good in people, especially if there's someone that we know. And, when something major happens in a community and you talk to the people, he was a really nice guy, or she was this, or she was that. I mean, we want to look for the good in people when it really comes down to it. But, sterilization, is that something that would help with the pedophile situation or the rapist situation or whichever. But society, I don't think, is ever going to say, it's okay to sterilize people, even if it was the difference between, lethal injection or sterilization.
Where do you stand?
Right.
Where do I stand? Well, I pretty much don't think the pedophiles are I don't think they recover. I think it's something that they can't control. And
it's a mental illness.
It is. I think it's an illness that can't be controlled. And, I would like to see, personally, maybe the sterilization standpoint to see if it is something that would help with those impulses. And I think if you could help people to have a normal part of, life and come back and be a part of society, I think that would be the first goal. I don't have issues with the death penalty when it comes to people that maybe can't control those actions. If we're able to resolve that and let them be a part of society, I think that would be the way to try first. But it just seems that everybody's absolutely against sterilization. I know there's been people in prison that have been willing to have chemical sterilization to keep from their impulses and urges, and how successful that is, I don't really know.
And is it taught? So how many of pedophiles were abused themselves by an adult?
We'll have Dr. Khan on to help us with those things, because he's an expert in that area.
Yeah.
That'll be really good. How did we get to such heavy topics?
I don't know. It just got so heavy all of a sudden. I mean, the first thing I'm thinking about is, don't we have sort of a history of forced sterilization? I mean, we have the reason there is a sort of community animosity or social animosity toward that process is because we've been down that road before. And you have victims of, forced sterilization that come forth years later.
That pendulum, doesn't it? So we don't want that, and so the pendulum swings the other way, which is, we're not going to do any, and the answer's somewhere in the middle, and it's maybe
but it seems like we're almost in an era where the pendulum is swinging so far both ways, swinging wider and further with every revolution, rather than normalizing at any sort of center.
But that's politics, isn't it? I mean, really, when you look at, even if you look at the right and the left and Republicans and Democrats, and you create these extreme divisions to argue your point and maintain power, when the vast majority of us are just in the middle trying to find a decent answer.
Or just in the middle and don't care. Because we're unaware, or for any other reason.
Or too busy in our own lives to maybe care. So.
Mm-hmm.
Or we don't think they're as important as they think they are.
Until it happens in your family.
Until it happens.
Well, it's
in your
probably
family.
true,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Right.
And then it becomes something very important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I think we have to have a determination of what the goal really is. Is the goal to lock people up? Is the goal to bring them back into society as a productive member? What is the actual goal?
What does locking them up do?
Exactly. Well, what is our goal? Is our goal just to keep the community safe, and so we lock them up forever, and that would do that? Is our goal to bring them back into society? And if we know that, okay, this is an illness that they can't overcome, what are some ways we can do that? I mean, I think you've got to decide what the goal is, truly decide, and then figure out which direction you're going to go from there.
It's funny. I saw the interview with the president of Iran the other day. Did you guys see that on TV?
No.
And so he was talking about how the percentage of people who are incarcerated in the United States is like 1% or something like that of our total population. I don't know if that's accurate or not. And he was talking about in Iran how, well, we don't have nearly that many, and et cetera. I'm thinking, yeah, because you probably just kill them. You probably just chop off their hand. Of course you don't put them in jail.
Well, that was what we heard in Cuba, you know. I mean, you're under house arrest forever and ever. Like,
yeah,
you know.
So of course you don't have 1% locked up because they're all dead. But, I mean, and those people, that 1%, if that's accurate, I don't know, is where the vast majority of those coming from. It's probably coming from drug-related crimes, exactly. I would imagine. And so that brings up a whole issue.
And minor drug crimes, too.
Yeah. I mean, should we be putting people away in jail for minor drug crimes, and how does that play in? And I'm interested to know from a police point of view, when you see drug on the streets, what are the negative impacts, and does it make sense, do you think, to lock people up, or should we work on rehabilitation or change our crime laws altogether?
Because there's a view that people that have alcohol abuse or drug abuse, that is a sickness. I mean, that's a medical condition in a way.
And yet you turn around and it's prescribed for a medical condition.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's crystal meth. You take crystal meth. Is that?
Yeah, that's not for glaucoma.
Yeah.
But then you're hooked. I mean, isn't it very easy to get hooked? So is that a medical condition? Is that and then do you throw a person in jail for that, for trying to?
But they can be.
Well, so the question is, what is the role of incarceration, long-term incarceration in minor or moderate drug-related crimes? Is that what we're at? Is that the big question?
All right, Linda.
Well, I think my first question is, what would be considered a minor drug crime?
They've got a bag of weed.
Well, in the state of Oregon, you can't go to jail for less than an ounce.
Right. Okay.
This
so
is not
Oregon's a little unique.
Not to educate people on that.
Yeah, that's right. This is not.
We're not endorsing.
But in other states,
not creating a checklist.
It could be a very small amount, and you just happen to be walking home with a small amount, and you are within 15 feet of a school.
Right.
Well, we all know that, that's mandatory. If I understand right, that you go
1,000
to prison
feet of a
for
school,
that.
but it usually has to be in the packaged in the sense of a delivery type system.
But how easy is it for a cop to say, even if you had a quarter ounce, you had intent to sell, and you were near a school, therefore you're going down for the maximum, which is
well, I think part of that.
10 years, I think
it's easy to. I think it's easy to have that perception of that, but the legal system still there has to be a preponderance of the evidence, and then. Which is the 51%, and then the 98%, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So I think it's a little more difficult to get there. And I actually don't see people for minor drugs being sent to prison. Now, I'm not all the way through the system, and I know that people make pleas and that kind of thing. But the people that I see going to prison are people that have large amounts that are dealing and manufacturing and that. So
Oregon is
right, and I hear that, and it doesn't mean that it's not true. It's just not something I've really been a party of, because I've dealt with people that have had, amounts of drugs, and, methamphetamine doesn't have a medicinal purpose, and they have a large amount on them, and it's not much longer. I'm dealing with them again. So they certainly didn't go to jail for any period of time or prison any period of time. And so I have a hard time, I guess, conceptualizing that from the part the role I've played on the street. Right. And, I think it's easy to say that, I got sent to prison and all I had was this, but what is the reality of it? I mean, do we really have time in the court system, in the law enforcement system, in the prison systems to put those people in prison for a long time, with a little tiny amount of drugs, when we have people with large amounts that are affecting, huge parts of the community and that type of thing? I mean, realistically, I think it would be interesting to see what the exact statistics are, and what I think it's more of a perception than what is really going on.
And then those folks, at least from my understanding, and I've certainly been influenced by pop culture, but particularly the other show
I totally
Oz.
Didn't see that going.
But if anybody watched that show Oz on HBO, it was very enlightening into, first of all, what goes on in the prisons, and that basically, you followed stories of people that in their lives made some bad choices. One in particular was a lawyer who drank too much at a party, drove home, accidentally hit somebody and killed them, went into prison, had never, been a, criminal life, father, husband, productive member of society, and to see what happens to him over the course of the time that he's in, and he becomes a criminal because he has to learn how to function within. And I, from what I've heard, at least from some of the folks that work out of Salem, out of the prisons, that Oregon does, I think, have a fairly good prison system compared to other states. I mean, from what I've understood, and I could be wrong, but Oregon does focus a lot on rehabilitation, whereas other states don't. So I think some of those, they come in and they have to become a criminal to survive in prison. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, and I think that's definitely a tragedy when you have good people. They're not in that 10%. You have good people that make a bad decision, at one moment that changes their lives forever.
Exactly.
And it is difficult, I think, to be in a prison system, and I think you have to become a criminal, so to speak, or at least have a criminal mind in order to survive in there. Yeah. But the decisions you make when you come back out goes back to that decision you made way back that put you in there. What direction are you going to go from there? I think it's different for someone who's in that situation as opposed to someone who is socialized in the criminal system because they've always been in it and don't know how to function outside because they never had the tools prior. And I think it's, incumbent upon the system, so to speak, to give them those tools as opposed to someone who's had the tools, made a mistake, and where they go from there, I think it's their decision. And unfortunately, there are a lot of really good people that make that one split decision.
Exactly. That
changes their lives forever.
I think probably everybody at this table's had not maybe of that magnitude, but had something in their life where, in a split second, they didn't maybe make the best decision.
Fred, I don't know what you're talking about.
So, I don't even have to be crime related. I mean, just
Oh well, then absolutely.
But where and where in hindsight you've said, "Boy, I wish I hadn't have done that."
Truly, absolutely, I'll cop to that.
Okay.
That's
I'm not sitting around that table with a
no pun intended.
bunch of goody two shoes.
But here's what I don't understand. So we're talking about, in a lot of cases, drugs and alcohol and those sorts of things. Why is this such a big problem in the United States? So I have a tendency to drive things back to social issues. Why is this a big problem as compared to, for Jiminy Christmas, you have Afghanistan.
Jiminy Christmas.
Where did that come from?
What, Disney, circa 1957?
Well, I think I had some other word in mind, and it just was like,
his filter turned on.
How do I get that out? Jiminy Christmas.
I love it.
That's good. Jiminy Christmas. So Afghanistan, they're growing opium, and I don't know that I hear about this huge opium drug problem in terms of people being
heroin.
all. But why can other countries, why do they not have some of the drug problems that we have? Or maybe they do, and we just don't see it.
Well, I know in other countries, and I couldn't tell you the exact percentages now because it's been a while since I've been involved in any research, but in some of the other countries, there's a no tolerance for, say, drinking and driving, or a tolerance of a 0.02. And if you drink and drive in one of those countries, not even if you're in an accident, you may lose your driving privileges for life, never be able to own another car, go to jail, whichever. And I think in some of the countries you're talking about, the penalties are huge.
So our problem is we're too lenient on crime.
We're too lenient on the little stuff.
That can be part of it.
When you steal something, cut off your hand. Really, right?
Exactly.
You wouldn't do it again,
Yeah.
or the odds would go way down.
And if you know they're going to cut off your hand without 25 appeals, and this, that, and who can afford the best attorney or whichever, is that going to be a deterrent when you see a few people walking around the neighborhood with no hand? As opposed to, I think that's part of it. I'm not saying that I agree, but I'm just, if you're asking the generic question, why is this happening, but it doesn't happen in other cultures? It's like you mentioned about the prison, not having as many people in prison. Well, because they don't have as many people that are alive that are committing those crimes. And so I think that's more, but our social aspect is different. And I think also
the demands on civil liberties,
right.
In fact, the sort of the slippery slope of, okay, you can't drive forever, and you know what else? You can't vote.
And we have a tendency to abuse things, because you're not supposed to do them. So we were talking earlier about some friends that Mary had that are from Germany, and their perceptions of alcohol is different because for them, you grow up with it, so it's not a big deal. And here, you're young and you go out to a party and all bets are off because all of a sudden you're doing this taboo thing.
To rebel.
And so we kind of create our own environment where we create criminals or create criminal behavior based upon the way we set up our society.
Absolutely.
We drive people to that. I'm not saying you don't take responsibility, but we make it easier for them to behave that way.
From what I understand, and I've had a few friends that have had issues with drugs, and they've been rehabilitated. But what they will say is that alcohol is the gateway drug, and that nobody in America really wants to step up and discuss that, because it is such an ingrained part of our culture. if you think about it. And people don't want to sit and admit that what I enjoy to do, on an evening with a good steak and have a nice glass of wine is to some extent part of the problem. And so therefore we kind of brush that under the rug.
Right.
And I don't know if maybe in other countries they're more willing to look at alcohol and the role it plays. Again, not having done some research, I'm not sure.
In terms of policing, I mean, what do you see more of? Do you see more infractions due to alcohol or due to drug use?
I don't think you can draw a distinction between the two.
Curses.
Yeah, because a
There's
lot of
probably
times
both involved.
Yeah, if the law enforcement is responding, a large portion of the time, people have lost their ability to reason and be logical. And when you use drugs or alcohol to an excess, especially with the alcohol, you've lost that ability. So what happens? Law enforcement gets called. So, it goes back to the barbecue. When everybody's having a good time and out in the backyard drinking iced tea, they have their abilities to be reasonable and logic, and we don't necessarily, get called to those events. So, I think a lot of just the activity that law enforcement responds to is underlying related, to the alcohol or drug issue. Whether it's victims of a crime, property crimes, you're getting, people are stealing stuff to fence it, to buy drugs or whichever. So much of it is related around that specific issue. The property crimes, identity theft.
Should we legalize drugs?
That was for you, not me.
That's not controversial.
I don't think we go there.
Why not?
Well, they haven't.
Well, and that's really the question.
Answered,
I mean, we're already talking about sort of that our window is perhaps too opened a little bit too wide, right?
What do you mean?
We were talking about the fact that the penalties for small crimes, we tend to be too lenient. If that's the hypothesis, then then maybe legalization is sort of the pendulum swinging the other way.
I mean, if you're asking my personal opinion, I'm going to absolutely say no, and that's just based on my experience in life. It's not based on anything, academic or, anything like that. It's just my personal opinion. And because I think if it is more readily available, then I think you're going to see people thinking that that is something okay. It's safe, or they wouldn't make it. I mean, I hear that with kids and alcohol all the time.
Yeah.
So does that mean if we say, okay, it's legal, then we're endorsing that it's something that's not going to hurt you? The ecstasy, the rave drug. All the times I hear kids say, it's a safe drug. People don't fight when they're on that. They don't, but it's not a safe drug. There isn't a safe drug. It's going to have some type of adverse effect on you, and over time you will become a person that's involved in methamphetamine. And, I'm a drug recognition expert. I was when I was a law enforcement officer, and I know factually that you will, in fact, be addicted to methamphetamine when you use the ecstasy for a period of time. And I go talk in the high schools and talk with kids, and that's the first question they raise. We know that ecstasy is safe. And I get this ecstasy that has this markings on it, and they have the people there at the raves that check it for you to let you know it's okay. They're just letting you know there's not something else in it. They're not letting you know that it's okay. And it's just a misunderstanding. And I think once you make that readily available and there's a perception that we say it's okay, then there's going to be an amount of people that will use those thinking that we have said it was safe. And, I have such a firm stance against it, I guess, because I have seen many tragic deaths based around drugs, in my 19 years. And there is no way that I would personally say, yeah, this is okay. This is a good thing to do. This is going to be fine with having that experience in my background.
So how do we make, though, and I think that's a great stance, but how do we make the differentiation between, say, pot and alcohol?
Why does alcohol get to be legal?
Yeah.
Because you look at the stats of alcohol, you've got, and I used to teach OLCC classes, so we would run through the stats about alcohol, and you have 98% of domestic abuse is alcohol related, 99% of child abuse is alcohol related, over 50% of the people that kill themselves each year over the legal limit, intoxication limit when they do it. You've got like 76% of violent crimes, alcohol's related in some way. Many times it's the victim that was actually under the influence of alcohol, but in some way it's associated there. How do you then sit and justify that when something that is legal that we can go and purchase does just as much damage?
Yeah, I don't know. It's just the way our society is. That's the way we grew up. So somewhere along the line, we said, oh, well, alcohol's okay.
But
And then
see,
these other
the way
things
we
kinda
grew
came
up, I
into
mean,
it.
somewhere along the line, my grandfather was an alcoholic and died of it, you know? I mean,
Oh, yeah, we're talking...
And the way we grew up, somewhere along the line, that should have been a trigger mechanism that said it's not okay.
But don't you've got to look at, I mean, I hear what you're saying too, and even though I have a, pretty one-sided perspective, the things we have been talking about are in excess. We're talking about alcohol in excess. We're not talking about coming home and having a glass of wine with dinner. We're talking about people that are abusing alcohol. They're drinking, more than what would be considered a norm, and these kind of things happen. You get under the influence, you lose your ability to logic, to have reason and such. And like with many of the drugs, it's not like you can just pour out a little bit of a drug and that would be the amount that would, go well with dinner. You don't know how much you're getting. It's not regulated. You don't know what you're getting, and it's going to be to excess. But if you take alcohol and you don't put in that abuse situation and you have one drink, would anybody here argue that to have a drink with dinner is an issue?
Well, that's really the argument.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to step up and say that. I happen to enjoy a few myself every now and again. But what I think what Mary's getting to is really that question, is why, is how come, I mean, how do we know that next drink isn't going to be the one that tips you over to excess? Just as how do we know that next joint isn't going to be the one that leads you to, standing 1,001 feet from a school with, barcoded and priced bags of pot? How do we know that's not going to take you to that next step? How do you know?
Yeah, because the excess question is one that begs of, well, okay, if you did regulate those drugs and barcode them, then would you know where excess is? And then could it basically become simply like alcohol? Or is the nature of some of those drugs different in that the tendency is into excess far more than alcohol? Therefore, we as a society say that temptation is too high. The trade-off and the negative things that happen is greater than alcohol, so the limit's there, and we've made that decision. But we are, with not putting people in jail for minor drug crimes, we are slowly but surely eroding that and saying, oh, well, this is okay and this is okay. And so that's kind of happening by default anyways. It's just not regulated. And
not just the small drug crimes, any of those crimes that are drug-based, identity theft, burglary, those kind of things. You get caught 50 times before something actually happens, and the reason those crimes are occurring is so that we can purchase drugs. We can purchase the things to manufacture. I mean, it's connected. So it's not even the minor drug stuff; it's the minor crimes. That come off of it. Until you get into something bigger.
Is that an economic issue? I mean, do people then? So then it goes back to, well, if we had jobs and things for people to do, therefore then they wouldn't feel that they had to do this, and ergo we wouldn't have the crime and those sorts of things.
Well, and I think, we talked about a social issue before we started the show, what do our kids and people have to do? I mean, we wait till you become 18 and then we throw you out into society, but we haven't done a lot to cultivate, work ethics and that type of thing. So then do the kids know how to function? And then you grow up in a home where people aren't functioning, and so do you have a mentor to help you? And so then it does become an economic. I think it's a social issue. I mean, it's there's not one way you can say this is it.
So we should do mandatory military, 2 years of service.
Not necessarily military, but it gets to it's a whole nother show.
Maybe it would be interesting, though. I mean, another kind of study to look at, which is the change in society where you have both parents working now, and you have both parents working much harder to stay ahead. So you have maybe a lot more absentee fathers to some extent, too, who leave very early in the morning to go off to work, and then by the time they get home, and so less, like we were, before kind of talking, less bonding with their parents and some of those things that then, so they start looking to the other avenues, thus sexual predators, thus their peers, and really influencing them in the area of drugs and alcohol or those kinds of things. And so it'd be interesting to see how stats have maybe changed as that has changed in society. I don't know.
Yeah, interesting too that I read a study recently on the millennials being a generation that is more influenced by their parents than any generation heretofore. That they are staying at home, they're forecasting that they're going to stay at home longer, that they're going to, their whole world is going to change. and I'd be interesting to see how that will play out in terms of their.
You mean that the millennials or the Gen Y have a tendency to stay home and not step out?
They're wanting to change.
To have a peer relationship with their parents, unlike any before.
Oh, because they didn't have a relationship with their parents, and so they're missing it. So they're saying they want to establish one. Is that
perhaps?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see as that group comes through. It's like 45 million people or something like that.
And they're due in like 20 minutes, 25 minutes.
Yeah, I mean,
they're all going to be here.
All on the show.
All of them.
So here's a thought. What about as a society, if we were to, or as the government, if they were to subsidize families that had a parent that stayed home with the kids? Would that money better be served
Look out, Jamie's
to help
good.
do that as opposed to using those monies to fund rehab programs and those other type of programs?
Prison.
If truly, part of it is the fact that everybody's working in the home, there isn't that one-on-one time with the family and the kids and that development. If that was the case, then wouldn't that money be better spent? And if a family has a parent at home, there's some types of subsidy that helps pay for that so that you can make ends meet. But then we're going to have a family, that's functional.
Well, I'm going to argue with the premise which says you can't make ends meet unless both people work. I mean, you have to go back to what does it take to make ends meet? And there's a lot of commercialism and consumerism which says, well, I have to have this SUV and I have to have this. And if you look at the percentage of home ownership, we live in larger homes than we've ever lived in.
I don't know about all that, Jamie. I mean, I think there are a lot of people out there who don't really give a whip about the next SUV or a 1,700 square foot house that really are just trying to make ends meet.
But their health care costs are killing
because
them.
they cannot afford to live based on their situation.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting to have a really in-depth discussion and look at some of the data and different things, because part of our perception is, I think and we'll see it all the time, and again, I hate to make generalizations based upon a couple of observations, but you'll have a family maybe that doesn't have a lot of money, but then we have to make sure we have the greatest $250 Nikes, and so, I mean, we have little mixed up priorities. I'm not saying things aren't hard and it's hard to live. I wonder sometimes if we create our own problems because of what our perception is of what our needs are versus what our real needs are. And that if we really focus on what our real needs are, that we wouldn't really need as much and both parents wouldn't have to work. So I don't know how I started on that conversation.
Yeah.
Well, I started.
She started
it,
and she
but I
sent you
understand
down
your
that road.
perspective as well. I mean, I think that you have some really good points there. Is it so that we make two ends meet, the ends meet so that we can, we're at the bottom part of Maslow's hierarchy, or is it making two ends meet so that we're at the neighborhood's, level of hierarchy?
Well, and I think too that kind of one of your question is lending itself a little bit to a more strategic solution to a problem versus the quick fix solutions, which is create more laws, put more people in prison, whatever those are. That doesn't stop people from the crime. So if we jump to like the programs of community policing, that I saw as, and I'd be curious to see your thoughts on how that works, but that seemed to be a strategic, proactive approach to stopping crime versus, let's just build more prisons to put the people in. Getting the police to be partners with the community so that then people are more likely to trust them to tell them about things going on or and to have them become an integral part of the solution. So what have your thoughts been on community policing, how have those programs worked or not worked?
Well, I think community policing has been going on for a long time with agencies that are successful. I think it's just now has a term that goes with it and maybe some programs that go with it. But if you ever read the Wamba books and the Blue Knight, he walks a beat and he knows everybody in his area. He knows the store owners, he knows the family, he knows what cars or people are supposed to be there and what aren't, and he recognizes right away when something is not how it should be. And that's kind of what the premise of community policing. Your neighborhood's involved. The more eyes you have seeing things, the better. But you're involved in your neighborhood. You just don't drive through it. You know the people that are there. You know the people that are in the businesses within the city, and you know what should be there and what shouldn't. And it's just actually taking the time to kind of go back to that. And then there's programs, of course, that there weren't back in that time. Where you have house checks when people are gone, and they know your neighborhood does that. Criminals are probably less likely, to come in. Educating people, it's not a good idea to leave your laptop in your car, sitting on the seat for people to see. and especially if you leave your car unlocked.
Or
Not that if
running.
it's locked, it's going to stop people. But,
Especially if you leave your
yeah.
keys in the
Yeah.
ignition.
All
the window's open and a
Exactly,
sign.
exactly.
Just take me.
And leave your garage door open at night because you live in a safe community. It's hot, and then your golf clubs are gone, or those type of things. It's educating the public on what they can do just to make it a little more difficult for the criminal. And usually, if it takes more time, then they're going to go somewhere that's easier.
I mean, really, it goes back
Makes
to
sense.
community. If you stop and think about, we tend to solve symptoms in terms of, well, we'll do jails and all those sorts of things. But if you go back to, so what makes a good society in terms of healthy and vibrant? It's strong community, it's good education, it's a community that cares, takes care of each other, you look out for each other, you do help raise other people's kids. I called my neighbor the other day, dude, your garage is open. You want me to close it? I mean, you want to do that because it's midnight. And I mean, you help kind of support each other. And in the areas where we don't do that, things break down and crime and different things break out. And so it goes back to, how do we support our societies better? And nobody wants to put money to that because people don't. They want to see criminals in jail.
Yeah,
They
it's
don't
not
want
tangible. You can't touch it. You can't reach out to an overcrowded prison and say, "Look at all those guys that aren't stealing my golf clubs."
I mean, I would argue that we build these huge mega high schools and stuff, that we'd be far better off to build smaller schools
more
in
of
these
them.
communities. And yeah, that's a little more money because of the overhead, but you're going to know what's going on, and you're going to know what cars are supposed to be there and not be there, and there's a broader sense and a tighter sense of community, and so those types of things don't foster the negative things. That's the answer. How do we get back to that?
Right. Well, and I think that if you were to really track, like, what's it cost on that end, everything from the police officer's time in dealing with the hunting them down, catching them, booking, to what the cost is of the time in court, from everything from the judge to all the people involved to then the prison costs and what it takes, guarantee that's costing us way more money than the money we're putting in proactively to build these community programs, or I bet you anything, to build more schools. I bet we're spending way more money over here. But like Pete said, you have something tangible because you can be checking some things off the list.
You can budget it.
Well, this is just like the conversation we had last week with Bob Hamm. We were talking about No Child Left Behind and measuring your schools, and so therefore you've got something tangible to look at. But are you really hitting the real problem? You're measuring something to show some kind of progress, but underneath, are you really missing it? And it's the same thing here, I think.
Well, here's a tragic reality about the community that you brought up. When I grew up, I knew all the neighbors on my block, and the houses were further than 10 feet apart. 40, 50 feet apart. What would be considered probably 5 neighborhood blocks might be where one of my friends lived. But I knew everybody, and I knew their parents, and the parents knew the parents. And as police officers, we get calls regularly to go and talk to someone's neighbor about their dog barking or something like that, because they don't even know who their neighbor is, and they're 10 feet away. And I mean, that's a sense of community, and I think community policing tries to bring that back by having the neighborhood meetings and that type of thing. But I mean, it's a true tragedy when you think about the community. I still am in touch with people I grew up with in my neighborhood, and I haven't been there for over 30 years. And I go to people's houses that are 10 feet from the neighbor's house, and they don't have any idea who they are, if they have kids, what they do, anything about them. So how can you have a sense of community working together, to deal with problems when you don't even have the time, or take the time to even know who your neighbor is?
Yeah, that's really embarrassing. Yeah. I know one neighbor. I don't know the other. They moved in 6 months ago. Just never run into each other. Mm-hmm. Well, and I think that's probably part of it. Is nobody's ever around anymore.
You didn't go take muffins and welcome them to the neighborhood?
I don't do muffins.
But why not? But why not? I mean, if you really stop down and think about it.
Okay, bottle of wine.
Yeah, that I can do.
Why don't we do those things?
Well, that's a good question.
And we get so
because we're busy. We're so wired.
We're busy, but why are we
because
so
our
busy?
social lives, our socialization is taking us farther and farther away from our neighborhood.
But we're more lonely than ever. It was a great article. Some study came out in USA Today not too long ago talking about the loneliness of people. And people are lonelier than ever. And so in the time when we're lonelier than ever, you have crime issues, and et cetera, we can't even bake muffins and get them over to our neighbor to help resolve those issues.
Okay. I'm going to go bake muffins.
My goal for you is to bake muffins.
I am going to bake muffins. And a link to this podcast. I want them to hear that I'm talking about it.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah. That's what I'm going to do.
Kind of if we could just shift gears, because I know that I think one thing that would be interesting is what's the police force of the future, and what are we looking for in candidates now?
Well, I think the police officer of the future, I mean, we've seen a huge change in this. in the last 20 years, even since I became a police officer, and police officers are shifting towards a more educated group of people. It didn't used to be you had to really have any kind of education to become a police officer. My grandfather was a police officer, and he was 6'9". That's why he was a police officer. Where now, diversity is important, cultural diversity, understanding different cultures, being able to communicate, being educated, are all things that are very important for successful police officers because the face of law enforcement has changed. And so when we look at candidates coming in now, they need to be able to articulate, they need to be able to communicate, they need to be able to be mature. Education helps. It shows some stick-to-itness, some tenacity on that person's part. It's not an easy job, and so we need people that are going to be able to stick with it, be able to perform under pressure. And those are all the qualities I think that are very necessary now. And communication is really, really big. I mean, you've got to be able to talk. You've got to be able to de-escalate situations and talk to each other. It's not who's going to be the biggest person. It's going to be the person that can defuse the situation, and those are the people that are going to be successful in law enforcement. And the community has really made the request that the quality of officer changed. And it's no longer the good old boys. It's no longer the biggest guy, the biggest gal. The community is required. They're asking for diversity because our communities are diverse. They're asking for educated people. They're asking for people that communicate. And, that's the direction, and that's the direction it's going to continue to go as our community develops. They're looking at police departments to develop as well.
Great. So, folks,
Yeah.
hug your police officers.
Now,
Tell them you appreciate them.
What's your role now? I mean,
Jamie's
you're teaching.
scowling at me. Yeah.
I'm just imagining myself running up to this big police officer and giving him a hug as he takes me down and cuffs me.
Yeah, you might let him know first, yeah.
I was told to hug you today.
Yeah, just
Okay.
warn him first.
The media told me to hug you. So what is your role now with are you still involved with the police force here at all?
No, retired in June as a lieutenant with the police department. Okay. And I've been taking a couple months off. Of course, I teach law enforcement and management courses, which I have for quite a while. But prior to retiring from the police department, I had been working on my doctorate. So my main focus right now is finishing that doctorate. And then once I do, will I go back into the law enforcement realm? Probably a pretty good chance of it.
Chief of police?
Maybe. Who knows? I'm really interested in helping minorities be successful in law enforcement and helping them to be able to get to where they need to be, I guess. And there's a lot of training issues that haven't been extended to a lot of people. And I would like to see law enforcement really trend that way, and I'd like to be a part of that. I think the more successful, educated our officers are, the more successful we will be, the community will be happier, and I think it takes people to step up and really start making that happen. So that's the role I hope that I end up taking in the future.
That's excellent.
Good for you.
Yeah. Thank you so much for coming by. We really appreciate you coming down, sitting down with us for an hour, and I feel like we talked about everything.
Another great show. I mean, really.
No, it was wonderful.
Good
It was great. I learned a lot, and I appreciate your insights. I hope you'll come back and talk to us again sometime.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
All
so
right.
much.
For us, Tuesday noon, we're out. This has been Tuesday Noon for August 15th, 2006, brought to you as a service of University of Phoenix. Keep up with us on the blog at Tuesday12.com and email us. We'd love to hear from you at the show at Tuesday12.com. Until next week, this has been Tuesday Noon.